Chapter 10 Part 1 of 2. A love you'll never want to leave. 20-year-old Ian McCormick set out from his native New Zealand to find the perfect wave, the perfect high, the perfect girl, and the surfer's life while traveling throughout Australia, Africa, and Indonesia, 2 years of doing whatever he pleased. But death never sends a meeting request, and one night while scuba diving with friends on the reefs off Mauritius, an island in the Indian Ocean, a school of box jellyfish stung Ian 4 times, and one sting is deadly. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital, Ian's life began to vividly replay before his eyes. People say just before they die their life flashes before them. Ian recalls, "My thoughts were racing. I'm too young to die, why did I go diving? I lay there wondering what would happen if I died. Is there anything after I die? Where would I go if I died?" Then I saw a clear vision of my mother. It was as though she was speaking out those words she had spoken so long ago. "Ian, no matter how far from God you are, no matter what you've done wrong, if you cry out to God from your heart, He will hear you and He will forgive you." In my heart I was thinking, do I believe there is a God? Am I going to pray? I'd almost become a devout atheist. I didn't believe anybody. Yet, I was confronted by this vision of my mother. 1 Ian found out later that his mother had been roused awake from a dream showing her that Ian was dying at that very same moment, and there in New Zealand she prayed for her son with all her might. Ian recalls, "I didn't know what to pray or whom to pray to. Which God should I pray to? Buddha? Kali? Shiva? There are thousands of them. Yet I didn't see Buddha or Krishna or some other god or man standing there. I saw my mother, and my mother followed Jesus Christ. I wondered what I should pray. The Lord's Prayer his mom had taught him came to mind, but then he couldn't remember it. As his elevated legs pressed the poison deeper into his brain, Ian desperately pleaded with God to help him remember. "Forgive us our sins" came up in his mind. "God, I ask you to forgive my sins, but I've done so many wrong things," Ian said. "I don't know how you can, but please forgive me of my sins." The next line came up, "Forgive those who have sinned against you." Ian thought, well, I don't hold grudges. Then came the question, will you forgive the Indian that pushed you out of the car and the Chinese men that wouldn't take you to the hospital? I thought, you must be joking. But Ian says that no more lines would come. He realized that if God could forgive him, he must also forgive others. Line by line he prayed for God's will to be done in his life. Then he slipped away. At first, Ian found himself fully alive, but in utter darkness that terrified him. We will explore this often overlooked part of his story in coming chapters. Ian describes what happened next. "I was weeping by now and I cried out to God, 'Why am I here? I've asked you for forgiveness, why am I here? I've turned my heart to you, why am I here?' Then a brilliant light shone upon me and literally drew me out of the darkness. I could see that the source of the light was emanating from the very end of the tunnel. It looked unspeakably bright, as if it was the center of the universe, the source of all light and power. It was more brilliant than the sun, more radiant than any diamond, brighter than a laser beam. Yet you could look right into it. As I was being translated through the air I could see successive waves of thicker intensity light break off the source and start traveling up the tunnel towards me. The first wave of light gave off an amazing warmth and comfort. It was as though the light wasn't just material in nature but was a living light that transmitted an emotion. The light passed into me and filled me with a sense of love and acceptance. Halfway down another wave of light passed into me. This light gave off total and complete peace. I tried everything I could think of to find peace and contentment in my life, and I'd never found it. Now from the top of my head to the base of my feet I found myself totally at peace. In the darkness I hadn't been able to see my hands in front of my face, but now as I looked to my right to my amazement there was my arm and hand, and I could see straight through them. I was transparent like a spirit, only my body was full of the same light that was shining on me from the end of the tunnel. I came out of the end of the tunnel and seemed to be standing upright before the source of all the light and power. My whole vision was taken up with this incredible light. It looked like a white fire or a mountain of cut diamonds sparkling with the most indescribable brilliance. As I stood there, questions began racing through my heart. Is this just a force, as the Buddhists say, or karma or yin and yang? Is this just some innate power or energy source, or could there actually be someone standing in there? I was still questioning it all. As I thought these thoughts, a voice spoke to me from the center of the light. It was the same voice that I had heard earlier in the evening, guiding his prayer. The voice said, "Ian, do you wish to return?" I replied, "If I am out of my body I don't know where I am, I wish to return." The response from this person was, "If you wish to return Ian, you must see in a new light." The moment I heard the words "see in a new light," something clicked. I remembered being given a Christmas card, which said, "Jesus is the light of the world, and God is light, and there is no darkness in him." So this was God. He is light. He knew my name, and he knew the secret thoughts of my heart and mind. I thought, if this is God, then he must also be able to see everything I've ever done in my life. I felt totally exposed and transparent before God. You can wear masks before other people, but you can't wear a mask before God. I felt ashamed and undone. My first thought was that this light was going to cast me back into the pit, but to my amazement a wave of pure unconditional love flowed over me. It was the last thing I expected. Instead of judgment, I was being washed with pure love. Pure, unadulterated, clean, uninhibited, undeserved love. It began to fill me up from the inside out. I proceeded to tell him about all the disgusting things I'd done under the cover of darkness. But it was as though he'd already forgiven me, and the intensity of his love only increased. In fact, later God showed me that when I'd asked for forgiveness in the ambulance, it was then that he forgave me and washed my spirit clean from evil. I found myself beginning to weep uncontrollably as the love became stronger and stronger. It was so clean and pure, no strings attached. This love was healing my heart, and I began to understand that there is incredible hope for humankind in this love. I was so close I wondered if I could just step into the light that surrounded God and see him face to face. As I stepped into the light, it was as if I'd come inside veils of suspended shimmering lights, like suspended stars or diamonds giving off the most amazing radiance. And as I walked through the light, it continued to heal the deepest part of me. Standing in the center of the light stood a man with dazzling white robes reaching down to his ankles. I could see his bare feet. The garments were not man-made fabrics, but were like garments of light. As I lifted my eyes up, I could see the chest of a man with his arms outstretched as if to welcome me. I looked towards his face. It was so bright, it seemed to be about 10 times brighter than the light I'd already seen. It made the sun look yellow and pale in comparison. It was so bright that I couldn't make out the features of his face. I knew that I was standing in the presence of Almighty God. No one but God could look like this. 3 The mystical being of light. The highlight of many NDEs, for all who claim to have come near, is this mystical being of light who fills them with a love beyond imagination. Dr. Long's study asked, "Did you seem to encounter a mystical being or presence?" NDers responded with 49.9% selecting definite being, or voice clearly of mystical or otherworldly origin. But just who is this being of light? Not surprisingly, this question is where researchers' opinions diverge most. Ossis and Haraldson, 2 researchers, studied 500 Americans and 500 Indians to determine how much religious or cultural conditioning shaped one's near-death experience. They noted, if the patient sees a radiant man clad in white who induces in him an inexplicable experience of harmony and peace, he might interpret the apparition in various ways, as an angel, Jesus, or God, or if he is a Hindu, Krishna, Shiva, or Deva. 5 Though I have heard researchers state conclusions like this, I have never read of NDers describing anything like Krishna, who has blue skin, Shiva, who has 3 eyes, or the descriptions of dissolution of the individual self in the impersonal Supreme Brahma, the ultimate Hindu reality. Though they may make different interpretations, what they do describe is similar across cultures. After reading close to 1,000 NDE accounts, the characteristics of the being of light they report seem amazingly consistent with what the Old Testament prophets and Jesus revealed. In the next few chapters, I'm going to not only help you imagine how loving and personal God is, I want to show you why I've come to this conclusion. You may differ with my interpretation of this being of light, but at least consider how clearly NDE testimonies correlate with Scripture. After all, if this being of light is truly as wonderful as NDers say, don't we want to know who he is and how we can know him personally? Simran nearly died in a bus crash in Mumbai. She recalls, a bright light appeared, having a soft man's voice that told me, "You will leave everything behind, your loved ones, the hard-earned award, money, even your clothes. You'll come to me empty-handed." The light also gave me an important message to follow it. How can I put it in words? The feeling is way too beautiful and miraculous for someone to believe. But so true, so loving, so peaceful. 6 An Indian woman reported to her doctor before dying, "Look, I am seeing heaven. There are beautiful gardens and flowers, children are playing and singing there. Many people, high houses. There I also saw God. It looks very beautiful." 7. Ossis and Haraldson make the case that the phenomenon within each culture often do not conform with religious afterlife beliefs. Christian ideas of judgment, salvation, and redemption were not mirrored in the visions of our American patients. We will examine why this might be and what this means in a later chapter, but Ossis and Haraldson also note, several basic Hindu ideas of the afterlife were never portrayed in the visions of the Indian patients. The various Vedic loci of an afterlife, Hindu heaven, were never mentioned. Nor were reincarnation and dissolution in Brahma, the formless aspect of God which is the goal of Indian spiritual striving. The concept of karma, accumulation of merits and demerits, may have been vaguely suggested by reports of a white-robed man with a book of accounts. 8. The researchers note that none of the Indians mention the ultimate Hindu goal of moksha, the self finally absorbed into the impersonal ultimate form of God, yet Indians did sometimes describe this very loving, personal, white-robed being of light with a beard and a book of accounts. The Indian patient seemed to die. After some time, he regained consciousness. He then told us that he was taken away by messengers in white clothing and brought up to a beautiful place. There he saw a man in white, with an account book. 9. Another Indian saw a bearded man standing at the opening to a long, golden corridor. 10. An Indian doctor reported that his patient saw a beautiful scene, lovely flowers. In there he saw a man dressed in white sitting with an open book. 11. Ossis and Haraldson mention, in Indian NDEs, the man with the book of accounts is always pictured as a benign ruler. An aura of sacredness rests upon him regardless of whether he is called the man in a white robe or God. 12. Steve Miller studied Western versus non-Western NDE accounts and discovered the same. An Indian reported a person with a beard, looking through books to see if the NDE was to remain or to be sent back. Miller says, I found all the common Western elements in the non-Western experience. 13. Dr. Bruce Grayson, studying cross-cultural NDEs, concludes, even the cross-cultural differences observed suggest that it is not the core experience that differs but the ways in which people interpret what they have experienced. 14. What these researchers do not seem to realize is their subjects might not be describing their own cultural ideas of heaven, but they are describing the heaven of the biblical prophets. The Old Testament prophet Daniel, living in Babylon in the 6th century BCE, saw this vision of heaven. As I kept looking, thrones were set up and the one who has lived forever took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne and its wheels were a burning fire, describing brilliant light. The judge was seated, and the books were opened. And I saw one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the one who has lived forever, and was brought before him. And he was given power and shining greatness, and was made king, so that all the people of every nation and language would serve him. His rule lasts forever. It will never pass away. Daniel 7 verses 9 to 10, 13 to 14 NLV. Daniel sees God surrounded by brilliant light, books are opened, and one like a son of man, the Jewish Messiah, is given supreme authority and rule over all nations. The Dead Sea Scrolls attest that Daniel was written before Jesus' birth. David also mentions the books of heaven, saying, Your eyes saw my unformed body, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Psalm 139 verse 16, italics mine. When you look at the characteristics of the God described by the ancient Jewish prophets, it's amazing how NDErs seem to be experiencing either the same wonderful God, or an amazingly good counterfeit. Let's imagine for a moment what it will be like to be with the one who created you for himself. God is love. Have you ever wondered how there could be so many love songs? I've come to believe that every form of love we experience on earth, no matter how intense, is merely a drop in the ocean of love God created you and me to experience. We can't get enough of love because ours always falls short of what we crave. The Old Testament prophets tell us that God created all people for a unique, loving relationship with Him, and even though humanity turns away from God to taste the bitter fruit of the knowledge of evil, God's love has pursued us relentlessly. Around 4,000 years ago, 1,500 years before most of today's world religions originated, God chose Abraham and Sarah to create a special nation to preserve His promises and foretell His coming as Messiah for all nations. God's love has always extended to all the nations. In contrast, most deities are local or for a few special people. Yahweh, God, told Abraham, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Genesis 12 verses 2 to 3, italics mine. Over 500 times in the Old Testament, God speaks of the nations. Yahweh has always acted out of love for all people of all nations. Khalida wandered the streets of Bethlehem as a child, orphaned by a missile that took the lives of her whole family. Sold into slavery as a child, she traveled the Arab world with a Bedouin tribe and was married off to a very abusive Muslim man. Her husband eventually beat her and left her for dead, taking her only daughter with him. She then married a man who took her to the United States. When her life was threatened by her second husband's beatings, she managed to flee with her 2 children. She was homeless and penniless. A woman saw Khalida's plight and offered her a job and a home for her and her children, and she told Khalida of the love of God found through Jesus. Khalida wanted the love this woman had and asked Jesus to show her if he was God. Khalida claimed she had a vision of heaven much like the prophet Isaiah or Daniel. Now, I don't believe everyone who claims to have visions. I've never had one, but I've heard multiple accounts like Khalida's among Muslims. Reporting such a vision can bring severe persecution. She claimed to experience this vision of heaven, which shows God's persistent love for all people and is consistent with the Bible and NDE descriptions. A person was standing in front of me, but different from any person I'd ever known. I heard his voice. It was the same voice I heard years before. Though I didn't know who it was then, while still in Palestine, he said over and over to me when my Muslim husband was beating me and threatening my life, "Leave the darkness for the light." Now, he said in Arabic, "I am the truth, the life, and the way, and no one comes to the Father except by me." His voice was like rushing waters, powerful and soothing at the same time. The minute he said, "I am the truth," I knew immediately it was Jesus. He didn't say, "I am Jesus," but every fiber of my being knew who he was.